Inglês. Pronto. Então quer que eu fale primeiro português, depois inglês? Não sei. Bom dia. Algumas palavras em português e depois algumas em inglês. Bom dia a todos, aos que estão aqui presentes, aos que estão online. Em nome do CIDEUS, dou as boas-vindas a todos os que estão neste segundo encontro internacional sobre paleografia e diplomática, as boas-vindas à Universidade de Évora, as boas-vindas à cidade de Évora. É com muito prazer que me encontro a abrir este segundo congresso de paleografia e diplomática. Muitos de nós sabemos e conhecemos que não estamos perante áreas temáticas particularmente protegidas ou apoiadas nos últimos anos, pelo contrário, na verdade são áreas onde, embora a investigação tenha prosseguido e tenha continuado, muitas vezes são áreas periféricas no que diz respeito ao investimento que as instituições fazem nessas áreas, e por isso é ainda mais importante que este congresso se organize e que se encontre já na sua segunda edição. E por isso também gostava de agradecer sobretudo à comissão organizadora, à Ana Ferreira, à Leonor Garcia, ao Marcos, à Ofélia, que são jovens investigadores e também por esse facto acho que vale a pena realçar a força, o empenho que estes jovens investigadores têm colocado na organização deste congresso. Na verdade, o futuro é deles e a nós cabe-nos apoiá-los para que esse futuro seja o melhor possível. E, portanto, também por isso, pelo empenho, pelo trabalho, mas também porque eles são o futuro da nossa investigação, o futuro da universidade, o futuro dos centros de investigação. Um obrigado muito especial. Obrigado também a todos os comunicantes e conferencistas que se disponibilizaram para vir a Évora ou para participar online neste encontro. O programa penso que é muito interessante e muito aliciante, infelizmente eu não poderei acompanhá-lo na sua totalidade, mas penso que, na verdade, teremos 2 dias e meio muito interessantes de comunicações e de possibilidade de debate. Portanto, desejo a todos uma boa estadia na universidade, uma boa estadia na cidade. O tempo está ótimo, aproveitem também os intervalos para passear um bocadinho, para conhecer a cidade, quem não conhece. On behalf of CIDEUS, I want to welcome all to this second international congress on paleography and diplomatics in Évora. It's very grateful for me to be here for the second time. I know that it's not easy to organize a congress in on these thematic areas, and so it's very special for me to be here and to see the number of papers that will be presented during these 2 days and a half. It's very grateful for me also to be in a congress organized by young people, and I want to recognize the role of these young researchers in this congress and in organizing this congress. And I think the program is very interesting. So I wish to you all 2 days and a half of discussion, of debate, and of course also of some socialization between us that is very important. And after these 2 years of pandemics, it's, I think, very nice to be here again with our colleagues of different countries, of different places, and have the opportunity to change ideas, to change some different contributions. And that is also, I think, a very important thing in our profession. It's not only to make our presentation of the papers, but have the opportunity to discuss them and to speak about them. So I hope you can enjoy these 2.5 days in the University of Évora. Let me say you that you must know at least this building is very beautiful. So I hope you have the opportunity to go around and to know something about this building, but also about this beautiful city of Évora. So enjoy the debate, the scientific debate, but enjoy also the city, because I think it's important both to have the opportunity to doing both things. So have a nice Congress, and thank you all to be here and enjoy these 2.5 days. And now.
Muito bom dia a todos, muito obrigada pela vossa presença. Vamos começar os nossos trabalhos com a apresentação do professor Roger Chartier, a quem agradecemos muito a sua disponibilidade para estar aqui conosco. A sua apresentação intitula-se Erasure and Inscription, Book History, Sociology of Texts and History of Written Culture. O professor Chartier pertence à 4ª geração de historiadores formados pela École des Annales. Tem trabalhos publicados na área da história cultural, sendo particularmente conhecido pelos seus trabalhos sobre a história do livro. É professor emérito do Collège de France e professor a convite na Universidade da Pensilvânia. Good morning. We welcome you and we thank you very much for your presence. Professor Chartier, thank you very much for being here with us. Professor Chartier will start his presentation with entitled Erasure and Inscription, Book History, Sociology of Texts and History of Written Culture. And Professor Chartier belongs to 4th generation of the Annales School. He has published work in the field of cultural history and he is recognized for works on the history of books, publishing and reading. He is Professor Emeritus at the Collège de France and professor at the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences in France. He is also a visiting professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor, thank you very much once again for being here, and now you have the word.
Bom dia. Em primeiro lugar, queria agradecer à Comissão de Organização pelo seu convite. É prazer e uma honra para mim dar esta primeira palestra do Congresso. I shall give it in English, at least my English, as suggested by the organizer. Erasure, to erase, or in different European languages, effacer, cancellare, apagar, borrar, is perhaps a paradoxical topic for the opening lecture of a Congress devoted to disciplines that decipher and interpret written traces, as do paleography and diplomatics. However, it is perhaps illuminating to understand how I've considered erased text the 3 intellectual and methodological traditions that have converged for defining the field of the history of written culture: book history, sociology of text, and global history of writing culture. These 3 perspectives are associated with the names and works of 3 great scholars who deeply transformed their own disciplinary field: Henri Jean Martin, Donald Mackenzie, Armando Petrucci. The choice of this topic has also 2 reasons. The first one is biblical. In Exodus 17:14, and I quote the text from the 1611 King James Bible, I quote, "The Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven." As observed by Peter Stas commenting upon this verse, God's demand is that one must write in the book to remember, but what Israelites must remember is to forget. Deuteronomy 25:19 makes still clearer that it is the visibility of erasure that will provide the memory of forgetfulness. I quote, "Thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it." Forgetting is a condition of memory, as wrote Paul Ricoeur. In the Bible, the material traces of erasure indicated by the words in translation, putting out, blotting out, are permanent recall of what must be forgotten. Such attentions characterize also the contradictory fears about the written word in early modern Europe, but also before the early modern times and until our digital world. The first fear was the fear of loss, erasure, forgetfulness. It inspired the quest for the lost books, the dream of universal libraries, the preservation of texts allowed by Gutenberg's invention. Paradoxically, the success of these enterprises produced a second anxiety, the fear of an uncontrolled proliferation of the written word, the multiplication of useless books, the disorder of discourse. As shown by Anne Blair in her book, Too Much to Know, the attempts for taming such a textual excess inspired the production of anthologies of excerpts, the compilation of commonplace books, the publication of encyclopedic works, as the Polianthea or the different bibliothecae. The fear of proliferation of discourse inspired also in the 18th century the utopias that wanted to reduce all useful knowledge to a single book. The different techniques and practices of erasure can be considered as one of these instruments allowing what Foucault called the rarefaction of discourse. From the perspective of textual studies, erasure is a form of obliteration by addition, the addition that spots or stains with ink what was previously written. Let me take an example for a recent research I devoted to the representation of Jacques rebellion in the play that constitutes the second part of Shakespeare's Henry VI. And in fact, the play was written in collaboration. This play attributed anachronistically to Cade and his follower in 1450, a radical hostility against all the users of the written word and against to those who mastered it that had characterized, in fact, the 1381 rebellion of the peasants led by Wat Tyler. In the first edition of the play, published in the format in quarto in 1594, Cade declared, "Why is not a miserable thing that on the skin of an innocent lamb should parchment be made, and then with a little blotting over, with ink, a man should undo himself." Cade claimed here the superiority of oral testimonies over written documents and shared the distrust of written modes of proof, to quote Michael Clancy's formula. The skin of an innocent lamb, identified, of course, to the lamb with the Lamb of God, is transformed into an instrument of oppression when it is sealed by the subscriber after that quote, little blotting over with ink has possibly changed the meaning of the document. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the verb to blot out, to blot over, appeared only at the end of the 14th century, at the same time that paper became more commonly used in England. In Henry VI, however, it remains associated with the skin of the innocent lamb. At the time of the performance of the play in the 1590s, legal documents authenticating ownership on lands, rights, or privileges remained in England principally written on sheep's or lamb's skin. It was still more the case, of course, for charts, registers, and rolls in the 1450 at the time of Kate's Rebellion, as attested by the recent researches led by Nicolas Ruffini-Ronzani on the archive of the Cistercian Oval Abbey in Belgium, or on the religious and civil institution of the city of Chartres. The preference given to parchment for deeds that documented ownership and transmission of properties and rights was justified by the impossibility to alter the text written on animal skin without leaving a visible trace of erasure or rewriting. It was the reason why, in the 12th century, the Lord Treasurer Richard Fitz-Neal, in his Dialogus of Scaccario, prescribed that the rolls registering the incomes of the crown should be made of sheepskin. I quote the translation: "If perchance, through carelessness or for any reason, the scribe makes a mistake in writing the roll, either in a name or a number or a fact, any of the things which make up the substance of the roll, he must not dare to erase it, but must cancel it by underlining it with a thin line and write the needed correction after it, because they are not easily erased without being obvious." It is this difficulty, if not the impossible erasure of the text once it was written down on the lamb's skin and blotted over with ink, that for Kate undo a man forever. Blotting over, crossing over, was the most common practice for the expurgation of books that were permitted by the Congregation of the Index under the condition that were obliterated the passages considered as erroneous, seditious, or heretic. The use of crossovers and pastovers avoided the inconvenience created by cutting out the leaves containing the prohibited text, because this cutting out removed also part of the work that were not prohibited. The censorship of the 3 or 4 Babylonian sonnets included by Petrarch in his Rime is an example of such post-publication erasure. According to Peter Stallybra's research, 1/3 of the copies of the successive edition of Petrarch's Rime were expurgated. The prohibited poems were crossed over, obscured by thick ink, or covered by a piece of paper glued to them. If the professional expertise of the censors made the poems really unreadable, the expurgation carried out by the readers themselves were less radical, and the reader can nearly always still read the condemned texts. A similar relation between erasure and preservation, between forgetting and remembering, characterized the Venetian edition of Petrarch Rime in the last 25 years of the 16th century, because they included blank spaces allowing the addition of the poems copied by hand or cut in other editions. The same technique was used for deleting explicitly anti-Christian passages in the Hebrew books published in Venice, the blank space being sometimes filled from memory by the reader, or at least by some of them. Cardinal Bellarmine perceived the danger of this blank space that reminded readers that something had been eliminated. If books are to be correct in a reliable way, one should be sure that no case of the read errors remains. The case from Shakespearean folio present in the library of Jesuit colleges that welcome the son of the English Catholic families are other examples of this censorship by erasure of already printed books. The first one is a copy of the second folio published in 1632 owned by the library of the Real Colegio Seminario de los Ingleses in Valladolid, now at the Folger Library. Founded in 1589, this college was preparing Catholic missionaries to be sent to England. The Shakespearean folio was expurgated by a censor licensed by the Holy Office of the Inquisition, an English Jesuit named William Sankey. As shown by Brian Cummings, 21 plays out of the 36 in the folio were left without any marking. But in 12 plays, the expurgator carefully blotted out with ink words or lines conveying all sexual jokes, indecent innuendos, negative allusion to priests. 3 plays were more harshly censured in such a manner. King John, for the reference to the authority of the Pope, Henry VIII, and particularly Cranmer Prophecy at the ending of the play, and Measure for Measure, which was cut out from the book as if were unbearable, both the action of the Duke impersonating a priest who confessed and gave absolution, and the hypocrisy of the moral control and rigorous censorship of Morris imposed by Angelo. The second example is only one copy of the first folio present, if not in Spain, but at least in the Spanish Low Countries. It belonged to the library of another Jesuit college for English students, the College of Saint-Omer, officially founded in 1594. The copy of the folio owned by the college was used as a prom book for the performances given by the students, and it was also the object of an intense censorship, particularly in the first part of Henry IV, characterized by the blotting out of obscenities and profanities, by the substitution of hostess by host, along with the suppression of all female characters, and by many lines or speeches bracketed for deletion or crossed out, blot out. A more drastic modality of erasure challenges book history. The lost books that are the object of the collective research led by Andrew Pettigrew for reconstructing the print world of pre-industrial Europe. Such a perspective must be understood in 3 different dimensions. The first one is a contribution to the history of print culture. As shown by Don Mackenzie, the essential activity of many printing shops in early modern Europe was not the printing of books. Their presses were mainly used for travaux de ville, job printing, forms, formularies, receipts, certificates, indulgences, posters, and so on. These ephemeral works have not survived, and their decisive importance for the activity of the printing shop can be measured only by recovering traces of the existence in the archives of the local institution or ecclesiastical or civil authority that commissioned it. A second fundamental issue of this research and reconstruction is the history of publishing. The immense majority of the lost books are not books at all, but pamphlets. That is to say, according to the meaning of the term for the London Stationers' Company, a stab-stitched brochure constituted by a limited number of sheets, as for example, broadsheets, ballads, chapbooks, almanacs, calendars, ABCs, and so on. Their fragility exposed them to disappearance. For example, only one copy of the first in-quarto edition in format of pamphlets of Shakespeare, Venus and Adonis, Titus Andronicus, and the first part of Henry VI are conserved today, and only 2 copies of the first edition of Hamlet in the same quarto format of a pamphlet in 1603. Some editions have totally disappeared, without any copy surviving. It is a case for Love's Labour's Won, a play attributed to Shakespeare in 1598 and listed in the inventory of a bookseller in Exeter in 1603. The Bibliothèque, the library without walls of the 16th century, from Gessner to La Croix du Maine or Duverdier, the epitomes summarizing thousands of works, as for example, Hernando Colón Libro de los Epítomes, recently rediscovered in Copenhagen, the catalogs of private libraries, particularly the catalogs established for the auction sales, and the advertisements in the newspapers show that many titles cannot be today associated to any surviving books, and that for other books, we know, thanks to some edition, many editions did not left any copy. If the attention paid to job printing allows to reconstruct the actual activities of the printing shop, the discovery of the lost edition of books or pamphlets illuminates both the strategies of the publisher that are not limited to their publication present today in our libraries, and the actual circulation of works that often cannot be reduced only to the surviving edition. A third category, lost books, is constituted by the works of which the existence is mentioned in print books or scribal documents, but that were never printed and without any surviving manuscript. The case for the majority of the plays performed in England between 1560 and 1640. The lost play databases constructed by the Fulcher Library lists 797 plays known only by their titles or mention of their performances. They represent perhaps the 2/3 of the title we know. Shakespeare is present in this list with the History of Cardenio, a play written in collaboration with Fletcher that was the first English dramatic appropriation and adaptation of Don Quixote. Renaissance English drama constitutes thus a huge continent of lost text, comparable perhaps to the Greek and Latin literature. As we know, Luciano Canfora has established for the antiquity the reasons and the laws of such disappearance that have cast into oblivion texts we know only because other texts mention them, quote them, or summarize them. So this is the second perspective, the perspective of book history and the multiple meaning of erasure understood as the disappearance of losses of text or books or editions. Whereas my first approach was about how textual studies can cope with the obliteration, blotting over, cutting off of some text. My third perspective will be the perspective of the global written culture as defined and as practiced by Armando Petrucci. And in this case, the erasure is not only the result of a violent suppression, as in the first perspective focused on the modality of censorship. Erasure must be considered as a condition for reusing the same writing surface. All the written texts in early modern Europe were not destined to be conserved, and their possibility of fixation on parchment or paper were not necessarily what they must be. Some of these texts must be ephemeral, erasable once they have lost their utility. In early modern Europe, writing tables, librillos de memoria, tablets were these objects on which writing could or must be erased. The writing surface covered with a thin coat of plaster, glue, and varnish could be written on with a stylus and erased or wiped away by a wet linen cloth or a moistened finger. In 1734, the Diccionario de la Real Academia defined the librito de memoria as, I quote, a small book habitually carried in the pocket, the blank pages of which are covered with a coating, embetunadas, and which includes a metal pen in the point of which a small and sharp piece of pencil is inserted, with which one notes whatever one did not wish to entrust to the fragility of memory, and which is erased afterwards so that pages can be used again. More reliable than memory, because it fixed it in writing what might otherwise be forgotten, the librito or librillo de memoria was nevertheless not a permanent archive. 1 century before, Covarrubias' Tesoro de la Lengua Castellana, published in 1611, had no entry, librillo de memoria. But, however, the term appeared in the definition of memorioso, and it appeared as the equivalent of pugilares latine vel palimpsestus, similar to the wax tablet of the ancient, pugilares. The librillo de memoria, erasable, reusable, is the palimpsest of the moderns. The definition stressed both the morphological similarities between wax tablets and writing tables, but also their historical discontinuity. Because in the dictionary, we find the article cera, wax, and Covarrubias indicated before paper and ink were invented, people wrote on wax tablets, tablas encerradas, and with a stylus, follow the quotation, they inscribed the letters in wax. Elisabeth Laloux has shown that the use of paper developed in France led to the disappearance of the inscription on wax tablets of the French royal and municipal accounts. Ephemeral writing, destined to be forgotten or copied, was no more made on wax tablets, but on another support. In the case of Spain, the librillo de memoria. In Cervantes' Don Quixote, the librillo de memoria, abandoned by Cardenio in the Sierra Morena and found and reused by Don Quixote, was one of these new objects, these small notebooks allowing to write, to erase, and to write again. In Golden Age Spain, inventories of aristocratic and princely estates often mention sumptuously decorated libros de memoria, including a stylus, clavo, palo, pulillo de oro, which served as indicated in an inventory of property brought to France in 1615 by Anne of Austria. This stylus served para escribir en libros de memoria. To be sure, not all librillos de memoria were as precious as these. For example, the inventory of the commodities that Jorge Noy imported to Mexico in the last 16th century mentioned 5 dozen of small libretes de memoria. The low prices of such libretes suggests that they were fairly common goods and not only the precious objects owned by the grandees of Spain and also by Cardenio, whose Librillo de Memoria was, said the text, richly bound or decorated, ricamente guarnecido. The ubiquity of this object in Golden Age Spain is confirmed by its mention, its presence in the comedias. In the public square or streets, the characters on stage used it for immediate transcription of exchange words, recording of fleeting thoughts, and drafting short text. Lope de Vega used the Librillo de Memoria in three different manners in his comedias. First, the Librillo de Memoria is a material object transformed into a prop carried by various characters on stage. Second, the varnished tablet is an image used for designating the fragility of memory. Again, the idea of memory as a repository, as an archive, that conserved the written word. The comparison insisted, on the contrary, on its vulnerability. In Amar Ferreira y Esperar, the servant Andres declared that, I quote, memory is not bronze, but like a varnished tablet, tabla con barniz, that is easily erased and rewritten. In Covarrubias' Tesoro, the article barniz, varnish, indicated that varnish can be used for coating paintings, coating paintings, varnished iron, and the tablets for writing, las tablas en blanco para escribir. And he added, latine tabele gipsata seu de albata, Greek palimpsestos. Finally, the erasable table in Lopez comedias were a metaphor for inconstancy, and particularly woman's inconstancy. In El Príncipe Perfecto, Beltrán declared, woman's mind is like a blank tablet, blanca tabla. If you are written there today, tomorrow, they will erase you. Their love is like varnish, and it takes no more than one day to write Don Pedro where Don Juan was written. Omnipresent in everyday life and on stage, the Librillos de Memoria are absent in our libraries and archives today. I have seen only one of them in the library of Princeton University, a Librillo de Memoria used in Guatemala between the 1580s and the 1660s for recording births and baptisms or for recalling past events. According to Don Skimmer and Ted Stanley, who analyzed it, I quote them, despite of century of use in Guatemala, the erasable notebook was neither Spanish nor Latin American in origin. And they said, binding evidence pointed to its production in the Lao countries, probably circa 1575. The two authors observed that erasable tablets are exceedingly rare today. They are right, but perhaps with one exception, England. Between 1570 and 1630, two London bookbinders, Frank Adams and Robert Triplett, published a series of notebooks designated as writing table with a calendar for 24 years. Printed in 16 format, these small books contain some standard elements of classical almanacs, such as a calendar, a list of fairs, distance between cities, table of weights and measures, multiplication tables for Roman numerals, table of coins in circulation, but they included also blank pages covered with a coating of plaster, glue, and varnish that could be written on with a stylus and then erased. In the 1604 edition of this writing table, we find in the calendar for the date of December 13 the following instruction: to make clean your tables when they are written on. Take a little piece of sponge or linen cloth, being clean without any soil, wet it in water and wring it out, and write that you have written very lightly, and it will be out. And within 1/4 hour, you may write in the same place again. Put not your leaves together while they be very wet with wiping. 21 copies from 18 different editions of Adams and Triplett's writing tables have survived, particularly because they were considered as a printed object. With a minimum print run of 1,500 copies, we can suppose the circulation of 30,000 copies. But it is likely that other editions have totally disappeared and that the press run could have been more important, suggesting the circulation of perhaps 1,000 copies. It is not surprising that we find them on stage. After he decided to wipe away from the table of his memory all trivial found records, Hamlet shifted from this medieval metaphor of memory conceived of as a library to the material presence of the object, allowing to erase and write again. And we can suppose that the actor had in his pocket. Hamlet declared, "My tables, meet it is I set it down," to set down what the ghost said, "Remember me." The stage direction or dialogue of numerous plays reveal the uses of the writing tables that allow to write out of doors, without quills, without inkhorn, without knife, to record a thought, to copy down an order, to transcribe a sentence, to take down a text on the fly. However, the text that it is possible to decipher on the quoted pages, either because they were written with ink and not a stylus, or because they can be read in spite of the erasure, are different. Medical recipes, keeping accounts, dates of fairs. These traces of writing have in common the fact that they were destined to be copied on a more durable medium. It is reasonable to assume that the writing tables were used to transcribe sermons and plays. The stenographic method.
Então, dizem que nós temos registros familiares, não é? Até de tantos a tantos vezes, tiveram na Torre do Tombo que temos, e depois para mais esclarecimento.
To collect the quotations encountered in the course of reading and then sorted out under the thematic headings of commonplace notebooks, or to compose drafts of text, of which fair copies were later made on paper. Cardenio and Don Quixote used the Librillo de Memoria for drafting poems and letters. Hamlet for copying quotation, models, and sentence before he has erased all these found trivial records to just write on the table, "Remember me." Adams and Triplett's innovation that associated a calendar with erasable leaves did not mean that the writing table were unknown in England before their invention. As early as the beginning of the 16th century, English customs registers mentioned the importation of table books manufactured on the continent and particularly in the Low Countries. Produced in Antwerp, depicted by painters, the Flemish erasable notebooks were sent with books, writing paper, parchment, to booksellers established in Spain, and from there to Latin America. It is likely that it is in one of these bookstores that Cardenio bought his Librillo de Memoria, and that the Princeton notebook was imported to Guatemala. In England, and even after Adams began selling his calendar, including writing tables, imported erasable tablets continued to be sold by London stationers, but in this case, separated from any printed object. In 1611, the Code-Grave French-English dictionary indicated tablet writing tables. As in Spain, the French writing tables seem totally absent in the archives and library, but they were used. In 1690, Chartier's dictionnaire had an entry tablet. I quote, "It is said of a small book carried in the pocket that has some leaves of prepared paper or parchment, préparé, unto which one writes with a stylus or a pencil what must be remembered." It is on such a table that Clélie, in Scudéry novel published in 1654, drew the carte de tendre, the map of tender. I quote the English translation of 1678, "A pleasing fantasy entered her thought. She imagined it would be delightful to others, that is to say, to draw a map. And without any further consultation, she took her tablets and wrote, in fact, design that she had agreeably thought of." 1 century later, the Parisian bookseller Desnos invented a new paper that made easier the use of the tablet. In December 1770, the Journal des Savants praised this invention that overcame the inconveniences of the classical tablet. "Everyone owns them," said the article. "Il est peu de personnes qui n'en soient pourvues." But these tablets are not very easy to use because the coat of plaster is too thick and cannot be folded. Desnos prepared paper is thin, flexible, allowing easy writing or drawing. On his portable tables, writing is done with a pencil or a stylus. What is written on them, I quote, "can be easily erasable with breadcrumbs, and the tables can be reused every year." I said the article, "It will be enough to renew the almanac." Some copies of these late writing tables are conserved in the collection of the Library of the Royal Palace in Madrid. Writing tables and erasable tablets launch a double challenge to the history of written culture. First, they are extremely rare, or even completely disappeared, whereas they were a widely used vehicle for writing. They oblige to apply to written supports the principle that characterizes print culture. That is to say, the survival rate of the object can be inversely proportional to the importance of their circulation. Shakespeare's First Folio is not a rare book. 234 copies of the edition have survived. But numerous pamphlets or chapbooks are, being known only by one copy or only by the mention of their title. For reconstructing the entirety of a written culture, we must imagine an entire world of lost text and ephemeral writings. Secondly, erasable writings raise the issue of the deciphering of invisible text. When their support has survived, their traces can be deciphered as it's supposed by the title of one of the communications in this Congress. And I quote this title of forthcoming communication: "There is nothing hidden that cannot be disclosed." A famous essay published by Freud in 1925, Note upon the Missing Writing Pad, addressed this paradox. Freud's reflection started with a fundamental contradiction between two writing surfaces, paper and slate. Paper allows permanent traces, but its receptive capacity is soon exhausted, whereas slate has an unlimited capacity of reception, but cannot preserve permanent traces. Freud observed, thus, an unlimited receptive capacity and the retention of permanent traces seem to be mutually exclusive properties in the apparatus which we use as substitutes for memory. When the importance for him of the mystic writing pad or magic block, which was used in Vienna fin de siècle, and which combined the two capacities. This mystic writing pad was constituted by a slab of resin or wax on a pad or on a table, and a transparent sheet laid over the slab. This sheet consists in two layers. The upper layer is a transparent piece of celluloid. The lower layer is made of translucent wax paper. Writing, traced with a stylus, is erased when the celluloid and the sheet are pulled up, leaving the mystic pad ready for receiving fresh writing. But as Freud remarked, it is easy to discover that the permanent trace of what was written is written upon the wax slab itself and is legible in suitable lights. The contradictory characteristic of writing can be overcome because, I quote Freud, the pad provides not only a receptive surface that can be used over and over again, like a slate, but also permanent traces of what has been written, like an ordinary paper. The mystic writing pad offered to Freud a material analogy for the structure of the psychic apparatus because the perception consciousness systems has an unlimited capacity of receiving excitations and perception, but without durable inscription, whereas the naming system retains durable traces situated in the unconscious, but retrievable. On the mystic writing pad, as in the Libro de Memoria or the writing tables, writings were erasable, ephemeral, and could be multiplied limitlessly. On all these devices, however, the inscription that had disappeared could be deciphered by someone who knows how to retrieve it. Freud made a metaphorical use of the mystic writing pad to explain the structure of the psychic apparatus. Cervantes and Shakespeare referred to a common object of their time to designate the fundamental tension that inhabits the relation between writing and memory. On the one hand, the tablets allowed to fix in writing transcription of spoken words or mental thoughts that could be lost by the fragility of memory. On the other hand, all these traces are not destined to be permanent. It is in this sense we can say that erasure is a condition of the archive, as forgetting is a condition of memory. Conclusion. The scholarly disciplines devoted to the interpretation of traces are haunted by the losses that challenge their project. It is the case with the lost books, or more broadly, lost printed objects for photography, the sociology of Mackenzie in this manner. The discipline studies text in ordered forms and the processes of their transmission, including their production and reception. How is it possible to reconstruct these processes when the printed recorded forms have disappeared? The same question can be raised with the lost writings made unreadable by erasure or censorship, or destined to be wiped away on reusable tablets. How can cope with such invisibility the history of written culture, defined by Armando Petrucci as, I quote, the morphological analysis of the paleographic and codicological forms of written testimonies? The answer to this question for bibliography or for paleography are not easy, but they are not impossible thanks to the suitable lights, to quote Freud, of erudite scholarship. Thank you. Muito obrigado. Muchas gracias.
you very much, Professor, for your presentation on the possibilities of erasure and its perspectives. Now we have around 5 minutes if anyone wants to make a question or make a comment, and also on Zoom, for those who follow us on Zoom. Just 5 minutes.
And if you want, it's possible to do this in Portuguese or in Spanish, como the best.
We have a question on Zoom.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read, Professor? Maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
let's see. So Lucia Xavier is saying, thank you, Professor Chartier,
yeah.
wonderful presentation. I think it's just a comment.
It's not really a question. I can read it.
No, she has a question.
Ah, perfect. I can read it also on my screen.
If Lucia wants to speak, we can activate her sound. Lucia, quer falar? Se quiser falar.
Sim, possível.
Ok.
Yes, you can speak.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chartier. It was a pleasure to hear you. Finally, I studied your work for decades now, but my question is in the sense of the new digital technologies.
Yeah.
I've been discussing this the past week also with other people. Some documents which are, for example, damaged, and retrieving information for the naked eye, it's impossible. Sometimes we cannot read them, that's simple. And yet with the new digital technologies and digitalization of archives and algorithms and everything, we can retrieve this information. And how do you see this in the perspective of, because some of these damages in the support are caused by time. And yet we are being able at least to some extent, to beat time and retrieve this information in the sense of forgetting. You just mentioned, how do you see these developments? That's my question. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. I think that it's a lot of issue in your question because I mentioned this very briefly, that is to say that perhaps the digital world is giving an extreme form to this tension between the fear of loss and the fear of excess. Against the fear of loss, they have the idea according to which in the digital world, nothing is lost. That is to say, an absolute textual memory. And at the same time, as you say, there is a permanent necessity or possibility of the erasure. And on the computer, to delete is one of the key functions. So the tension is extreme in this case between the desire or the will to keep everything and the memory now translated to the machine seems to allow this, and at the same time this consciousness that not everything must or can be kept is also present. And of course, the issue is what you mentioned, that is to say how to, on the one hand, construct an archive of digital communication, which is absolutely omnipresent, ubiquitous, with ubiquity, constant. And how is it possible for the archives to keep traces or material of this, not only production of digital text by the institution, but also the production of digital text by the individual on the social network, on the immediacy of communication. And so you have this first issue. And the second issue is the possible obsolescence, sometimes desired, sometimes lamented, of this digital text, with all the problem of the conservation of the digital text. And I remember when the first scientific work were made on this support, they were no more readable when the software. So I think it's, in a sense, a very tense and dramatic issue for all people who are in charge to archive the present, in a sense, and the present being widely, if not universally, digital. This issue required, to quote Freud again, the adequate lights to decide what can be done for both constituting the archive and, secondly, preserving the condition of its readability.
Any more questions or comments? If we don't have, I think we can follow. Thank you once again, Professor. Thank you very much for your presence here with us.